Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show where I look ahead to the future as well as look at the news and politics in the week that was. If you are new, please be sure to like and subscribe. And if you're a regular, definitely subscribe so you get alerts as to when new episodes come out. So we will begin with the bombshell report out of Maine's U.S. Senate race with a primary tomorrow on June the 9th. We have learned more about Graham Plattner, the presumptive Democratic nominee. I have long said for months and months that this guy was going to come out with something that was extremely volatile, and that is exactly what has happened, and I have been vindicated. This guy is a complete asshole, and that is the truth. He had Nazi tattoos. Women he's dated have said things like he's toxic, he drinks a lot, he's a womanizer, texted allegedly women other than the one he was married to, nude pictures of himself allegedly. Another woman said he twisted her arm allegedly and locked her in a room allegedly, and I only use allegedly in the journalistic sense. He also noted that if someone broke into their house that he would rape them allegedly in a way that is dominant, not in a gay way, of course. And regarding rape, on Reddit, we learned about a week and a half ago, he said, holy fuck, how about people just take responsibility for themselves and not get so fucked up when they wind up having sex with someone they didn't mean to? Men and women, you make a choice to consume enough of a substance to lose your self-control. So if you don't want to be in a compromising situation, act like an adult for fuck's sake. Rape is a real thing. If you're worried about it, buy a Kevlar underwear so you think you might not get blacked out and fucked up around people you aren't comfortable with. And that's what he said. And then last weekend, which was the one before last, we learned that he was messaging women while he was married, and that is where one of the pictures from the thumbnail comes from, in case you're wondering. And obviously you can see the tattoos. And by the way, as I've said before, why do we know what this guy looks like shirtless? I have never seen anybody else shirtless except for Putin. So why do we know about this? I don't think we should. We shouldn't have seen him shirtless. Should have never, but here we are. Needless to say, this man is a wreck of a human being. This guy needs to be in therapy and maybe behind bars, not in the U.S. Senate. So what does this mean for the U.S. Senate race? Well, much of Plattner's support comes from women. Susan Collins, which will almost certainly be his general election opponent, has an advantage with men. And I would be stunned if he still wins after this. I think there is no way back, and if I was in Maine, I would not vote for this man, I'd vote for Susan Collins. And I would say this to his face, no asshole, rape is not the victim's fault. Rape does not depend on what the woman is wearing. And this is absolutely insane. And unfortunately, Democrats might be stuck with him. If he wins the primary, which it looks like he will, and he refuses to leave, I don't see what Democrats could do after that. Janet Mills is still on the ballot. She is the governor of Maine, but she is not actively campaigning for the role. And look, I know she's old. She's in her 70s, but and she's not exciting. I know that. But if this is about winning, then you got to go with her. Democrats have all been about winning. So this is what they got to go with Janet Mills. She will win. So we will also move on to the health of the U.S. economy. And as always, there are two conflicting reports that I want to bring to your attention. And we will start with the positive. Firstly, data from the U.S. Labor Department showed the United States economy had some strength. There are 7.6 million vacant jobs in the country, which is the most since May of 2024, which is actually when this podcast began. Layoffs also fell, and if you are not aware, 2025 was not a good year for hiring. Less than 10,000 jobs were added across all sectors, and that's also when you include that lots of government jobs were lost, so the private sector did okay, but it was not that great, and that was a recessionary indicator. So far this year, though, there has been 76,000 jobs created per month on average, and tax cuts passed by the administration last year have seemingly given the economy a boost at a time when it has been weighed down by sky-high oil prices. And according to an April report by the Federal Reserve economists, linked below if you're interested, it shows that drastic cuts to immigration and retirements, people retiring and people not moving to the U.S. as much, nearly zero jobs added each month is enough to keep the unemployment rate stable at about 4%, which is something that's completely shocking. They also project that growth this year will be close to 0%, which would contradict what we have seen so far. This would make it seem that we should have a falling unemployment rate, and we added 172,000 jobs in the month of May, and unemployment remains stubborn at 4.3%. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Unemployment should be falling, but it isn't. And with retirements, the labor force should actually be shrinking, but it seems like it isn't. So what does this mean for the broader economy? It means two things. First, that things are more solid than they were just 6 months ago at the end of 2025. It also means that economic growth might slow down. And I say it because if no new jobs are being created and our population is not growing, or in fact it's shrinking, then the only way for our gross domestic product, our GDP, which is the size of our overall economy, to grow is if our workers become more productive. And with AI, that is certainly possible, but without AI, it means we would almost certainly enter recessionary territory. And for people looking for a job, this could be good news, because if companies need more workers, then theoretically, they should be willing to pay more. However, this is where we get our other report from Fox Business, also linked below, where it says that 31% of CEOs are planning workforce reductions and that corporate leadership is losing faith in the trajectory of the American economy. And this is coming from Fox News. Just 3 months ago, they were much more optimistic. Only 15% of CEOs said the economy was better than it was 6 months ago, down from 39% in February and March. And 47% say it's worse, which is up from 8%. 40% expect economic conditions to worsen over the next 6 months. Considering the war in Iran, there is data to back up this with inflation, energy shocks, and more. So that's kind of the dual reality that we are living in. Numbers at the moment show that things seem to be fine, getting better even, but there are flashing red signs in the months ahead. And as you know, we are headed toward a midterm election. One other piece of good news is that oil prices are down. They're down about $15 from where they were before, because it looks like there might be a peace deal in Iran, although it is too early to say. Regardless, the price of oil is still about $20 a barrel above what it was in late February of this year. So next we'll shift to tariffs, and I'm sure that you are all aware that many of the president's tariffs were struck down earlier by the Supreme Court. However, we knew that he would try other avenues. He implemented a flat tariff of 10% until July, which was supposed to be temporary. Then something called the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, which we will call the USTR, opened investigations into 6 different countries, not including the European Union, so really more like almost 100 countries, accusing them of failing to impose and enforce laws to prohibit goods made with forced labor. So this is definitely going to put us at odds with countries like China, who have definitely had forced labor, but it seems we agreed last month during Trump's meeting with Xi Jinping not to have tariff increases. Most countries are going to get a 12.5% tariff. Some of them are going to get a 10% tariff, and the president also lifted some tariffs on specific industries this last week. So what's my take here? Well, the whole tariff debacle is a huge win for business and for political opponents of the president. And conversely, a huge blow to President Trump and his political agenda. And if you remember back in January of 2025, I said, right this moment, this is as strong as Trump will ever be. He will only get weaker from here. And this is exactly what I was talking about. And the vast majority of goods are now either exempt from tariffs, they had tariffs struck down by the courts, or have a minimal rate. However, with that being said, there are still tariffs on plenty of goods like brand name pharmaceuticals, steel, aluminum, automobile parts, copper, wood, and more. And even if tariffs rise to 12.5%, that's a long way down from 30, 40, and 50% rates. So what is next? Hearings will be on the 7th of July, and then new rates will go into effect after that. Now, I imagine there will be another flashpoint with China. How stupid is this? We knew for years that there was forced labor in China, particularly in the western part of China against the non-majority Han Chinese. The administration's officials were planning on raising tariffs on China, probably for over a year, and yet Trump agreed not to raise tariffs on China when he met with him last month. And the tragedy of this all is that if we go back a year, if the calendar said June 2025, and this is what we were doing, I actually would have said this is a good idea. We should have tariffs on countries that have forced labor, and we should stand with not only the workers who are being exploited in these countries, but with American workers who are never going to be able to compete with people who work for free. And as I said, if Trump came in and started this investigation and slapped tariffs on countries that had forced labor in their supply chains, that would have been a good idea, and it would have protected American workers. Instead, they started with the most outlandish thing and moved toward sanity. And if you've heard of the slippery slope phenomenon, often the slippery slope phenomenon, I actually am a big believer in it. But often it's the other way around. They start with the craziest thing, and then they go to the more sane thing. So the slope's actually inverted, which is, I think, the case here. Two more interesting things for you. One is on Capitol Hill, and the other is in California. On Capitol Hill, the House of Representatives advanced aid for Ukraine for the first time since, I believe, April of 2024, before this podcast even began. It was a narrow margin of 226 to 195, but regardless, it passed the House of Representatives, and it heads to the Senate, where I believe it will pass. Republican leadership has opposed the bill. Nearly every Democrat except Congresswoman Ilhan Omar voted for it, along with rebel Republicans crossing the aisle and voting with them. It has been a long position of the Republican Party since 2023 or so that we're not going to give aid to Ukraine. And we haven't really given any monetary assistance since Trump returned to office last year. So what's in this measure and what comes next? It includes 500% tariffs on Russian imported goods and a ban on importing Russian crude oil for the United States. It gives Ukraine $8 billion for arms sales, and it extends Biden's military lend-lease program. It might also surprise you to learn, if you're a longtime viewer of the show, I will actually support this. Normally, I do not support aid to Ukraine. I think we should be as isolationist as possible. So you might expect me to oppose this, but I like the idea of 500% tariffs. I actually think it should be 1,000% tariffs, but 500 will do. I'm not a fan of the Lend-Lease program or the $8 billion to Ukraine, but that's what it takes to ban Russian oil and get these tariffs in, then we'll go for it. However, it has to get through the Senate, and then Trump would have to sign the bill into law. However, I think Trump is actually going to veto, and he said he would veto this bill. And then lastly, we have the governor's race in California. We don't know a whole lot about this because nowhere near all the votes have been counted. As of this recording, we're at about 60%. We do know that the top three includes Javier Becerra, who worked in the Biden administration. We have Tom Steyer, the billionaire, and we have Steve Hilton. And Steve Hilton is the Republican, and then Becerra and Steyer are the Democrats. So that's the top three, and everybody else below that, count them out. They're not going to be in the final running. So Tom Steyer is not out of the running yet. He is in third place, but he could jump to second or first. The question is, are there enough Steyer votes remaining to push him ahead of Hilton into second place? Because as of right now, Becerra is in first place. And Becerra is going to head into the runoff that has been projected. And I think it's possible because 40% of the vote remains uncounted, and much of Steyer's base is in San Francisco. He could get a lot of votes out of that, where the Republican votes, probably the bulk of those have already been counted. So final results don't have to be in until July 2nd. It doesn't have to be certified until July 10th. But we should know before then, roughly. I have a feeling within the next 2 weeks we'll know. And in case you weren't aware, California, along with Arizona and Nevada, are some of the slowest vote counters in the entire country. And this could be a problem on election night in 2026 because we might not know who has control of the House until weeks after the election. We might have a direction where we're going, but we're not going to know for sure. And if it takes as long as it did in 2024 and in 2022 and 2020, then we're going to be in for a long November. And I think one of the craziest things that in a state that is at the cutting edge of innovation in Silicon Valley, and it was once such a forward-thinking state, they can't even count votes quickly. They can't even count votes quickly, and that's completely pathetic. So that is all for now. Thank you for tuning in. As always, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to check out my books. One's about my own life, and one's a fiction book I wrote. They both are in the description down below, and we will have another episode on Monday, June the 15th. Have a great day. Bye-bye.